July 31st, 1978. The first time I visited that place, it was the summer of my 18th year. That makes it about 20 years ago. As I got off the helicopter, I remembered the sight of the swirling wind the helicopter blades whipped into the air. When viewed from above, the old mansion seemed quite normal. But when seen from the ground, there was something foreboding and unapproachable about it. Birkin, my junior by 2 years, seemed as usual to be only concerned with the document he was holding. We were assigned to the mansion 2 days earlier, on the day that the executive training center we had belonged to was closed. It all seemed like it was planned, too much of a coincidence. But probably the only person who knew the real truth was Spencer. Spencer was one of the main guys in charge of America's T-virus research at the Arklay Research Facility. As soon as we got off the helicopter, the head of the facility was standing in front of the elevator, ready to greet us. I can't even remember the guy's name. Who really cares about formalities and figureheads like him? From that day on, the Arklay Research Center was ours. As chief researchers, we were put completely in charge of all aspects of the facility. Of course, that is just how Spencer had planned it all out. He chose us. We ignored the facility head and got on the elevator. I had already memorized the building layout the day before, and Birkin, although he has no bad intentions, never really pays much attention to other people. Most people probably get pretty irked from the first 5 seconds that they meet us. However, the facility head had no reaction at all. But then, I was a young buck, completely full of himself, so I didn't really pay the facility head any mind. But in the end, I was really only Spencer's puppet, and the facility head, whose boss was Spencer, at least actually knew what Spencer was up to and what he was thinking. The whole time we were riding in the elevator, Birkin never took his eye off the documents he was holding. The document that Birkin was scrutinizing so closely was a report about a new virus that has shown up in Africa. It was called Ebola. At this moment, there were many people all throughout the world who were studying the Ebola virus. However, I think there were 2 major reasons why they were studying it: to help people and to kill them. As you probably know, the death rate of someone affected by Ebola is 90%. In 10 days, it quickly destroys a person's organs. Even now, there are no known ways to prevent it or cure it. It could, quite possibly, destroy a large part of the human race. Of course, even before this, due to the Biological Weapons Prohibition Pact, it was illegal for us to study the virus as a weapon. However, even if we weren't the ones to research it, there was no proof that someone else wouldn't be doing that same thing, and so it was considered legal for us to research it, just in case. There is a thin line in international law between what is acceptable and what is prohibited, and so it became necessary to research how the virus study information would be used as a method of prevention, not as a weapon. There really is no difference in the way in which you research a virus as a cure from how you research it as a weapon. But since the 2 are very similar, it is possible to pretend you are researching a cure, while in fact, be researching the virus as a weapon. Even though at that time, for whatever reason, Birkin may have been looking at the Ebola report, he wasn't really researching the Ebola virus. The Ebola virus had too many weak spots. First of all, the virus could only survive for a few days, if not inside a human body. It would soon die if under sunlight, ultraviolet light, for too long. Secondly, since it kills the host too quickly, there isn't enough time to transfer, infect other hosts. Finally, the virus is only transferable through direct touch, and so it can be easily prevented. Try to imagine the following. If a person who was heavily infected, the disease had spread all throughout their body, could actually stand and walk around, and without knowing it, was in direct contact with other people of their own accord. What if the RNA of the Ebola virus could actually alter a person's genetic code? And if, through that, a person was able to carry the virus without dying? What if this person had the resilience of a monster? That is, wouldn't this person be a living dead whose body carried the virus? Something that could infect others, sort of like a living biological weapon. I guess we are lucky that the Ebola virus doesn't have the potential to do such things. I wonder if we will be successful in holding out to such a virus without it getting into the wrong person's hands. The Arklay lab, headed up by Spencer, was built for that purpose, it seemed. To create a disease capable of the characteristics I listed before. Officially, it was just a pharmaceutical company researching cures to viruses. But the truth is, it was really a factory for manufacturing biological weapons. The origin of the company was to create new starter viruses by recombining genes. In order to produce biological weapons out of these new starter viruses, they began studying virus mutations in order to strengthen the basic viruses they had created. This was known as the T-virus experiment. RNA-based starter viruses can easily be mutated. Through those mutations, it is possible to strengthen their traits. The reason Birkin was so interested in the Ebola virus was that he was thinking of recombining the Ebola genes into a starter virus to strengthen its attributes. By the time we had arrived at the research center, there was already a sample of the Ebola virus waiting for us. We changed elevators several times, finally reached the upper level of the complex. When we arrived, even Birkin looked up. It was the first time we had met her. We hadn't heard a single word about her before. She was a secret of the utmost confidentiality at the research center, and they didn't let any information about her out of the compound. According to the records, she was at the research center from the very moment it was first built. She was 25. But we didn't know her name, nor why she was here. She was to be used as the experimental subject host for the T-virus. The day we began the experiment was November 10th, 1967. We did T-virus experiments on her for all of 11 years. Birkin mumbled something. Maybe they were words cursing our situation. Maybe they were words of praise. In any case, we had come to the point of no return now. We had two choices: to succeed in our research, or to lay here rotting like she was. Of course, that meant we really only had one choice. She was bound to a pipe bed, and something about her made me think, had this been a part of Spencer's plan all along? July 27th, 1981. Today, a 10-year-old girl was sent here as a chief researcher from Umbrella's Antarctica research facility. Her name was Alexia Ashford. I was 21. Birkin was 19. As annoying as it was, the whole Arklay complex was rampant with rumors of Antarctica Alexia. Nobody talked about anything else. She had been at Umbrella for a long time. The older guys at Umbrella knew the legendary Ashford name. Before we ever reached a dead end in our research, one of the old-timers would say, if only Professor Edward was still alive. If I remember correctly, Edward Ashford was one of the people who first discovered the starter virus and who originally planned creating the T-virus. However, he died soon after Umbrella was founded. It's been 13 years since his death, so is there really anything to gain by having high expectations of the Ashford lineage? And in fact, the Antarctic Research Center founded by his son hadn't yielded a single result. Don't people know the limits of Alexia's smarts? She is only Edward's grandchild, after all. But from the day she came, our worthless, good-for-nothing subordinates began to say, it's a good thing Alexia is here. She may be from a famous family, carry great genes within her, but nonetheless, I knew it was going to be a real hassle having subordinates with such a lack of good judgment. It's idiots like that who, if they accidentally stuck their foot in a bucket, wouldn't be able to move or figure out what to do unless someone told them. At least I could still tell the difference. However, if at that time I would have gotten upset about the whole thing, it would have just slowed down our progress on the T-virus research. Unless you can keep your cool and still be decisive no matter what the circumstances, then success will always evade you. At that time I was thinking this: by making good use of the past, then we could definitely yield good results. And if some of those old-timers, who feasibly could die at any second, then they would make great test subjects. After all, do you think it is possible to stand above the people if you can't rationally use their human resources well? However, the problem was Birkin. The way he reacted to the Alexia rumor was terrible. He never really said it, but for Birkin, the fact that he was the youngest person to ever be a chief researcher was always something he was proud of. That pride was severely injured by having a mere 10-year-old become a chief researcher. It was probably the first time someone so talented as he had ever tasted defeat. He just couldn't accept the younger, girl of good lineage to be made a fool of by someone who hadn't gotten any results. Someone who had worked so far away. The fact that he couldn't get over it showed his immaturity. However, even though he was still immature, no matter what, I had to bring him back to his senses. It was during these 3 years that our research moved up to the second level. It was at this point that we fixed upon the idea of making a living biological weapon. We started to call the T-virus by a new name: zombie. However, it was impossible to get a 100% infection ratio. Within people, there is a subtle difference that the virus couldn't totally overtake. It seems compatibility was also a major factor. About 10% of the people who were injected with the zombie virus didn't get infected. And this was something that, no matter how hard we researched, we just couldn't overcome. A disease that would affect 90% of all humans seemed to me to be quite an effective weapon. But Spencer didn't see it that way. Spencer said he was hoping for a specialty virus that could easily wipe out everyone. But why in the world would he want something like that? One important characteristic of biological weapons was that they could be developed cheaply. However, the biological weapon that we were researching started to become very costly. If Spencer was in it just for the money, and he probably wouldn't have chosen to spend the extra money on researching a specialty virus that infected and wiped out 100% of its victims. It just wasn't financially worth it. Why would he want to ignore all financial concerns just to continue the research? If by changing the idea of war through biological warfare, he was attempting to monopolize all military industries, then I would have understood that. But even to this day, I have no idea what his true intentions were. But whatever Spencer's real reason was, Birkin was planning on making a biological weapon that would increase a country's military capacity. Not to just manipulate the genes of the T-virus, but also by adding other genetic code. He was planning on creating him. A military biological weapon that could annihilate those who went unaffected by the virus, as well as people who were wearing antiviral gear and equipment. This weapon was later named Hunter. However, that experience was temporarily put on hold in order to protect the test subjects from Birkin. Birkin's pace was quickened by Alexia's existence. He began to act out of the ordinary. He would stay at the lab for 24 hours straight, attempt experiments that he hadn't really thought out. I tried to use other researchers to get as many samples from the subjects before they died, but I just couldn't keep up with his pace. The head facilitator brought in a new subject as if nothing had ever happened, but she too soon died. It was hell. And within that hell, there was but one person living. The female test subject's body that continued to live on. She was already 28 years old, having lived 14 of the years in this research facility. Someone whose consciousness had been taken away by the starter virus that had been injected into her 14 years ago. Someone who, if their heart did happen to actually be alive, would only hope for death, but she continued to survive. Why was only she able to survive this long? Her basic experiment data and that of other test subjects seemed to be the same. It would still take a long time for us to solve this riddle. December 31st, 1983. The winter of my 6th year at the Arclay Research Center. For the past 2 years, there were no significant results, and time seemed to just stagnantly flow along. But before long, we had a breakthrough. The thing that started it all was a report we got that morning. Antarctica Alexia had died. The cause of her death was that she accidentally got infected by a virus that she herself was researching. It was called the T. Veronica virus. Alexia was 12 years old. It seemed she was just a little too young to be undertaking such dangerous experiments. There were many rumors to be heard. One particular rumor actually suggested that she injected the T. Veronica into her own body. No matter what the circumstances, I find that particular theory to be implausible. Probably, she was just so shaken up over her father's disappearance 1 year earlier that she just made a mistake in the experiment. After that, Alexia's last remaining blood relative, her twin brother, who had worked in the Antarctica Research Center, came and picked up her work where she left off, but no one had any expectations of him. In the end, the Ashford family was basically dead, without even yielding a single advance for the experiment. It was just as I thought. A legend is, after all, merely that, a legend. After the news of Alexia's death, Birkin changed. Or I guess I should say, he returned back to his normal self. But I guess the biggest thing was that all of his subordinates now had no choice but to think of him as the main researcher, since now there was no one who could surpass his talents. However, with that, it became taboo for anyone to talk about Alexia in front of him. He fiercely opposed me when I planned on getting a sample of the T. Veronica virus. I had no choice to put finding the truth about Alexia's research on the back burner. In the end, even though the situation was at its best, Birkin himself failed to grow up and advance his research. However, at that time, I was concerned more about a different question at hand. The Arklay Research Center was surrounded by a dense forest. I often hiked through the forest, but since the center was located in a mountain region, there was never anyone to be found nearby. The only method of transportation was by helicopter, and the center wasn't exactly the type of place that people came to visit. One important reason for the fact that the center was located in such an isolated location was to prevent the virus from getting out in the instance of a leak. However, biological weapons aren't that simple. Viruses don't only infect humans, they can infect other things as well. Any virus is usually capable of infecting more than one host. For example, the number of species that the ordinary influenza virus, the common flu, is recognized as infecting are birds, pigs, horses, seals, and humans. The difficult part is not that all types of animals, people within a species are affected. Even though within the bird species, ducks and chickens are affected, all other birds are not. And if a virus mutates, then the kinds and number of hosts it affects changes. So, it is impossible to create a virus that is capable of affecting everything. And that was the main problem, trying to adapt the T-virus so that it would affect everything that it came in contact with. After Birkin became useless, I started investigating the T-virus's communicative infection rate. It was then that I found out it was a fact that the T-virus could infect almost any kind of living thing. Not just animals, but plants, insects, fish, almost any species. The virus had the power to expand and disperse all over the earth. Whenever I would leave the center for a walk in the woods, I would always think to myself, why did Spencer choose this place? Because there were lots of different types of species concentrated in the woods. If the virus ever did get out here, then what would happen to a place where there were this many type of living things present? In the case of insects, they are small, so you might not think of them as dangerous, even if they are secondary carriers of the virus. However, insects usually exist in swarms, and that huge number makes them a very dangerous carrier indeed. If they were carriers, then how far would the virus spread? If a plant was a carrier then, since they can't move, you wouldn't expect them to be able to infect many people. However, what about the pollen that comes from plants? Considering those factors, the center was an extremely dangerous place to run virus research. And if you really think about it, the location of the Ashford's Antarctica Research Center was really a much safer and obvious choice. It would almost seem as if this place was specifically chosen as a location for the purpose of spreading the virus. But I just can't imagine that would really be so. What is Spencer trying to get us to do? This was a major issue, so big that I couldn't tell the other researchers. At this time, the only person that I felt I could have talked with about this was Birkin, but it was evident that telling him would be meaningless. I needed more information. It was at that time that I first began to feel the limitations of my position as researcher. I needed to get myself a position that had more access to information that would reveal Spencer's true objective. I felt no love lost for throwing away my position as a researcher in order to find out. But I couldn't rush things, because if Spencer ever got wind of what I was doing, then it would be all over. I jumped back into my research, and it was business as usual, so as not to call attention to my plans. During those times, the female test subject that continued to survive was left in some corner and forgotten. A living could have been. We began to call her that, sometime after she stopped yielding useful data for us. At least, until 5 years later, that is. July 1st, 1988. The summer of our 11th year at Arklay was just starting. I was already 28. Bergen had become a father and already had a 2-year-old daughter. His wife was one of the researchers that worked at Arklay. You would normally think it hard to understand someone wanting to get married and raise a child, all the while doing the research. But it is said that only non-ordinary people ever continue to do research at Arklay. Only the crazy ones ever succeeded here. And so, after 10 long years, our research finally reached the 3rd stage. To create a living biological weapon that was a soldier, that would follow strict orders, obey its program, and have intelligence. It was the so-called tyrant, basically a monster that we set out to create. However, there was a major obstruction to our research back then. Finding a basic body for tyrant. The biggest problem was that suitable bodies for tyrant were, at that time, genetically very limited. The source of the problem lay in the nature of the T-virus. The T-virus mutation used to create zombies and hunters could be used on just about any human, but it would also cause a decline in the subject's brain capacity. If the subject didn't have a certain amount of intelligence, then it couldn't function as a tyrant. Bergen tried solving the problem by picking out new mutagens that would keep down the wear and tear on the subject's brain, so long as the subject fit the tyrant profile. However, the number of people that had suitable genetics to accept the tyrant cells were very limited. In a genetic analysis simulation, it was found that only 1 in 1 million had the genetic makeup to become a tyrant. Any other person would merely become a regular zombie. If we could have continued with our research, then I'm sure we could have found a way to make a different type of T-virus that could change more people into tyrants. However, in order to do that research, we first needed people that were perfectly suitable for the new mutation. The odds of us being able to bring one of those few people living in America that fit the profile was extremely low. In the end, the only thing they were able to do was to, by force, bring a few close contenders in from other labs. Even before we had the chance to start our research, it seemed we had already hit an obstacle. At that time, I heard a rumor about another location in Europe where they had already reached the 3rd level of producing a living biological weapon, using a method that no one had thought of. It was known as the Nemesis plan. In order to change the stagnant working pace and conditions, I took it upon myself to get a sample of one of the subjects from that plan. Of course, Bergen first disagreed with me, but in the end, I was able to get him to reconsider. Everyone had no choice but to recognize the fact that, until we found a suitable tyrant subject, our research wasn't going anywhere. The package from Europe came at midnight, several days later, after a series of broadcasts, proposals, and counter-proposals. That box that contained it landed on the helicopter pad. It read, Nemesis Prototype. I had to use some very strong tactics to get the incomplete thing where it was being researched in France, but all the while, Spencer was backing me up, pulling all of his strings and using his influence. Only Bergen showed no interest in it until the end, but he at least recognized it as an important part of the experiment. The sample was developed to create a never-before-seen, totally new form. By manipulating genes, they had artificially created a living parasite. That was what Nemesis really was. It could latch onto another organism's brain and then take control of the host's brain, bringing it a high level of destructive power. By combining intelligence with a destructive body suitable for battle, they were able to form the ultimate biological weapon. And if they could complete the project, then they would be capable of creating warlike bodies without having to worry about the intelligence issue. However, the problem was that the parasite containing it was not stable. The only thing written within the document that was attached to the sample was, "Failure. Sample died." Over and over again. Anything that had been affected and whose intelligence was being controlled would die within 5 minutes. We all understood that messing around with the incomplete prototype was very dangerous. If we could only somehow manage to extend the amount of time that the hosts would live, then we could take control over the project. That was what I was aiming for. Of course, we would use her as our test subject. Surely her unusually high endurance would be perfect for sustaining the Nemesis prototype parasite for a long time. Even if she didn't last that long, it's not as if we would be losing anything special anyways. However, the experiment yielded a result that was opposite from what I was predicting. The Nemesis parasite that tried to enter her brain disappeared. At first, I didn't even know what was going on. I couldn't believe that she would be the one to mix with the parasite genes without dying. That was the beginning. Somewhere within that undying body of hers, there had been a change. We had to re-examine her from head to toe one more time. During our 10 years of research, she had been totally and thoroughly examined, but this time, we ignored that previous data. For the 21 years that she had been here, for the first time, something was finally happening. After she had already survived longer than other subjects who had received the Nemesis virus, it was only Birkin that started to realize what was happening. There was something within her. That something was a deviation from the T-virus plan. Something new that gave way to a new form. Something that changed our destiny. It was the beginning of the G-virus plan.